The legend of Ragnar Lothbrok survived largely because of the men remembered as his sons. Unlike Ragnar, several of these warriors appear in or can be associated with records much closer to the 9th century. Their careers stretched across England, Ireland, Francia, and the Mediterranean. They were raiders, commanders, settlers, and political rulers. The exact relationship between them remains uncertain. Medieval writers frequently used family connections to organize complicated historical traditions. Men described as brothers may have been biological relatives, half-brothers, adopted allies, or simply leaders who belonged to the same warrior coalition. Nevertheless, the idea that these commanders were sons of Ragnar became one of the most powerful traditions of the Viking Age. Bjorn Ironside was remembered as the bold explorer of the family. His name suggested supernatural strength or protection. According to legend, he was called Ironside because weapons could not easily harm him. Some stories credited this protection to magical influence from his mother. Bjorn's campaigns were connected with the western and southern seas. He was said to have attacked territories in Francia and traveled into the Mediterranean. Historical accounts describe a major Viking expedition that sailed through the Strait of Gibraltar and raided areas along the coasts of Spain, North Africa, southern France, and Italy. Later tradition associated Bjorn with this expedition. One famous story claims that he attempted to capture Rome but attacked the wrong city. Believing he had reached Rome, Bjorn supposedly pretended to be dying and requested a Christian burial within the city walls. Once carried inside in a coffin, he jumped out, seized a weapon, and opened the gates for his warriors. The story is almost certainly legendary, but it presents Bjorn as a clever commander who used deception as effectively as violence. Bjorn was also associated with Sweden and with the royal dynasty of Munso. Later genealogies claim that important Swedish rulers descended from him. Such ancestry gave political legitimacy. By connecting a dynasty to Ragnar's son, rulers could claim that their authority came from the heroic Viking past. Ivar the Boneless is perhaps the most mysterious of Ragnar's sons. His unusual nickname has inspired centuries of debate. Some interpretations suggest that he suffered from a physical condition affecting his bones or ability to walk. Others argue that boneless may have referred to flexibility, impotence, or a poetic description of his fighting style. The sagas sometimes portray Ivar as physically weak but intellectually brilliant. While his brothers relied on strength, Ivar relied on planning. He was patient, calculating, and often more dangerous than the warriors who appeared stronger. Historical sources record a Viking leader named Eymar, who became extremely powerful in Ireland and Britain. Many historians have considered whether Eymar and Ivar the Boneless were the same person, though the identification is not certain. Ivar played a central role in the Great Heathen Army's invasion of England. He appears as a commander capable of defeating kingdoms through both warfare and political manipulation. In the revenge legend, Ivar initially responded to Ragnar's death with apparent calm. While his brothers became angry, Ivar asked for detailed information. His silence was not a sign of indifference. It was the beginning of a plan. Ubba was another major commander associated with the invasion of England. He appears in Anglo-Saxon traditions as a leader of Viking forces during campaigns against several kingdoms. Compared with Ivar, fewer detailed legends survive about his personality, but he was remembered as a powerful battlefield commander. Ubba's career became especially connected with the fighting in Wessex. According to later accounts, he was killed during a battle in Devon. The English defenders captured a famous Viking banner that may have been decorated with the image of a raven. The raven was closely associated with Odin, the Norse god of war and death. Later stories claim that the banner had magical power. It would appear alive before victory, but hang motionless before defeat. Such stories are difficult to verify, but banners had enormous symbolic importance. They represented the identity, honor, and spiritual confidence of an army. Sigurd Snake-in-the-Eye received his name from a strange mark in one of his eyes, supposedly shaped like a serpent surrounding the pupil. The sagas identify him as a son of Ragnar and Aslog. Through Aslog, Sigurd was connected to the legendary dragon slayer Sigurd, making the serpent mark a sign of heroic ancestry. Sigurd was associated with rule in parts of Denmark. Later genealogies claimed that important Scandinavian kings descended from him. Like Bjorn, his importance grew not only from his supposed military achievements, but also from his place within royal family histories. Another son, Hvitserk, appears in several traditions. His name may have meant white shirt. Some historians have wondered whether Hvitserk was another name for a known Viking commander, possibly Halfdan. The sources are inconsistent, and it is difficult to determine whether they were the same man. Halfdan Ragnarsson was a major leader of the Great Heathen Army, and later became connected with Northumbria and Ireland. Some traditions list him as Ragnar's son, while others treat Hvitserk as a separate figure. This confusion demonstrates how oral stories and historical records blended over time. The sons were not presented as identical warriors. Each had a distinct character. Bjorn was the explorer and conqueror. Ivar was the strategist. Ubba was the battlefield commander. Sigurd represented royal inheritance. Together they formed an ideal heroic family. Their differences also made the stories more dramatic. When news of Ragnar's death arrived, each son reacted in his own way. One gripped a spear so tightly that his hand bled. Another continued playing a game but became visibly shaken. Ivar listened carefully and began calculating revenge. These reactions were literary devices. They demonstrated the personalities of the sons while building tension before the invasion. The historical commanders associated with Ragnar's family were driven by more than revenge. England offered land, wealth, and political opportunities. Scandinavian armies had already learned that Anglo-Saxon kingdoms could be pressured into paying tribute. By the 80s, Viking forces were prepared not simply to raid, but to remain. Calling themselves Sons of Ragnar may also have been politically useful. A shared legendary father could unite different leaders. It gave them a common identity and strengthened their claim to command. Whether Ragnar truly fathered these men cannot be established. It is possible that some were related, while others were added to the family tradition later. It is also possible that a historical Ragnar was the father of one or two commanders, and later storytellers expanded the family. What is clear is that the sons became more historically visible than the father. Their armies altered the future of Britain. They captured cities, destroyed dynasties, and established Scandinavian settlements. Ragnar's life may belong mostly to legend. The world created by his sons belonged to history. According to the sagas, Ragnar Lothbrok was brought before King Ella of Northumbria after the destruction of his small invading force. The legendary Viking, who had once crossed seas at the head of victorious armies, now stood alone and defeated. Ella did not immediately know the identity of his prisoner. Ragnar refused to give his name. Even in captivity, he understood that his reputation could be dangerous. If Ella discovered that he had captured the father of famous Viking commanders, he might fear the consequences of killing him. The king attempted to force Ragnar to speak, but Ragnar remained silent. His refusal was a final act of control. His army and freedom had been taken from him, but he would not allow his enemy to decide how he faced death. The sagas describe Ragnar wearing the protective garment made for him by Aslog. As long as he wore it, ordinary weapons could not harm him. When Ella's men attempted to kill him, they failed. Eventually, they removed the garment, leaving Ragnar vulnerable. Ella then ordered one of the most unusual executions in medieval legend. Ragnar was thrown into a deep pit filled with venomous snakes. The image is unforgettable. The aging warrior stands in darkness as serpents move around his body. He has no weapon and no path of escape. Yet he does not scream or beg for mercy. Instead, Ragnar recites a poem celebrating his life and victories. This poem is often known as the Death Song of Ragnar. In it, the speaker remembers battles, fallen enemies, and the pleasure of fighting. He looks forward to entering Odin's hall, where warriors feast after death. The poem was composed long after Ragnar's supposed lifetime, and cannot be treated as his actual final words. Its purpose was literary. It transformed an execution into a heroic performance. In Viking heroic tradition, the manner of death revealed the true character of a warrior. Anyone could claim courage while surrounded by allies. Real courage was demonstrated when defeat became unavoidable. Ragnar's final warning concerned his sons. He allegedly declared that the young pigs would roar when they heard how the old boar had suffered. Ella might kill Ragnar, but he would soon face Ragnar's children. This line became central to the revenge story. It allowed Ragnar to remain powerful even at the moment of death. His body could be destroyed, but his family would continue his struggle. The snake pit also carried symbolic meaning. Snakes appeared frequently in Germanic and Norse mythology. The world serpent Jormungandr surrounded the earth and would fight Thor during Ragnarok. Dragons and serpents guarded treasure and represented dangerous supernatural forces. Ragnar's legendary career had begun with the killing of a serpent. Now it ended among serpents. The structure was almost too perfect to be historical. It gave his life the shape of a heroic story. What do historians believe happened? The honest answer is that no one knows whether Ragnar died in Northumbria at all. The accounts describing the snake pit were written centuries after the 9th century. Contemporary Anglo-Saxon sources do not clearly record the capture and execution of Ragnar Lothbrok by Ella. King Ella was real. He ruled Northumbria during a period of political instability and fought against the Viking army that invaded in 866. He was killed after the Vikings captured York in 867. The connection between Ragnar's death and the invasion may have been created later. Storytellers knew that famous Viking leaders had defeated and killed Ella. They may have invented a personal reason for the conflict. Another possibility is that a Viking leader related to some of the invaders was killed by Ella, but his identity and the circumstances were later transformed. A battlefield death, execution, or disappearance could become a snake pit legend after generations of storytelling. Ragnar has also been connected with the Viking leader who attacked Paris in 845. Some Frankish accounts suggest that many members of that Viking force later died from disease. Christian writers interpreted their suffering as divine punishment for attacking churches. It is therefore possible that the historical commander behind part of Ragnar's legend died from illness rather than execution. Other warriors may have contributed additional elements to the story. The snake pit itself was not impossible as a form of legendary punishment. Britain has only one native venomous snake, the adder, and creating a pit containing enough active snakes to kill a prisoner would have been difficult, especially in colder weather. These objections do not prove that the execution could never have happened. They simply show why historians remain cautious. Medieval writers were not always interested in factual accuracy in the modern sense. Their purpose was often to explain moral lessons, celebrate ancestors, or entertain audiences. Ragnar's death accomplished all three. For a pagan audience, he died courageously and prepared to enter the afterlife. For a Christian audience, a violent raider received a terrible punishment. For the descendants of Scandinavian rulers, his death justified the victories of his sons. The legend also presents a warning about pride. Ragnar had been advised not to invade England with such a small force. He ignored the warning because he feared being overshadowed by his sons. His desire for personal glory led directly to his destruction. Yet even this failure became part of his greatness. Without the fatal expedition, Ragnar might have remained one successful warrior among many. The snake pit transformed him into a martyr of the Viking heroic tradition. His death also created the emotional foundation for the Great Heathen Army. The invasion of England could now be told as an act of family duty. The historical army likely came for wealth, land, and political control, but the legend gave it a deeper purpose. Thousands of warriors crossed the sea because one father had been murdered. As Ragnar died, according to the storytellers, he smiled because he knew Ella had made a terrible mistake. The king believed he was ending a threat. In reality, he was awakening an army. In the year 865, a large Viking force arrived in Anglo-Saxon England. Earlier raids had already brought terror to monasteries, coastal settlements, and towns, but this army was different. It did not come merely to seize treasure and return to Scandinavia before winter. It came prepared to remain, campaign, and conquer. English sources later called it the Great Heathen Army. The word heathen reflected the Christian perspective of the Anglo-Saxon writers who recorded the invasion. To them, the Scandinavian warriors were not only foreign enemies, they were followers of pagan gods. The exact size of the army is unknown. Medieval descriptions often exaggerated military numbers, and the word great did not necessarily mean tens of thousands of soldiers. Even a force of several thousand experienced warriors would have been extremely difficult for the divided Anglo-Saxon kingdoms to defeat. The army probably contained fighters from different parts of Scandinavia and from established Viking communities in Ireland and elsewhere. It may have included several independent groups led by commanders who cooperated because the English campaign promised enormous rewards. Tradition identifies the leaders as sons of Ragnar Lothbrok, especially Ivar the Boneless, Ubba, and Halfdan. The sagas explain that they came to avenge Ragnar's death. Historical motives were more complicated. England contained wealthy monasteries, productive farmland, and politically divided kingdoms. It offered opportunities for tribute, settlement, and kingship. The army first landed in East Anglia. Rather than immediately destroying the kingdom, the Vikings demanded supplies and horses. The East Anglians provided them, perhaps hoping that the invaders would leave their territory and attack someone else. The horses transformed the army's mobility. The Vikings generally fought on foot, but mounted travel allowed them to move quickly between regions. They could strike before an Anglo-Saxon ruler had time to gather his forces. In 866, the army moved north and captured York, one of the most important cities in Northumbria. The timing was perfect. Northumbria was divided by a struggle between King Osbert and his rival Ella. The two rulers had been fighting one another, but the Viking threat forced them to cooperate. In March 867, the Northumbrian forces attempted to retake York. They entered the city, but the battle became chaotic. Both Osberth and Ella were killed. This historical death of Ella became the foundation for the legend of Ragnar's revenge. Later Scandinavian stories described a much more dramatic execution. According to the sagas, Ragnar's sons captured Ella and killed him using the blood eagle. The blood eagle was said to involve cutting open the victim's back, separating the ribs, and pulling out the lungs. Historians debate whether this was ever an actual ritual execution, or whether the description resulted from misunderstood poetry and later exaggeration. No contemporary English source states that Ella died in this way. He was probably killed during battle. Yet the Blood Eagle story served the same purpose as the snake pit. It created poetic justice. Ella had given Ragnar a horrifying death, so Ragnar's sons gave Ella an equally horrifying end. After the fall of York, the Vikings installed a local ruler who depended on their support. This was a common strategy. Rather than directly governing every region, Viking leaders could control a kingdom through a cooperative ruler. The army then moved into Mercia. It captured Nottingham in 868. The Mercian king asked Wessex for assistance, and a combined army approached the Viking position. However, no decisive battle took place. Negotiations allowed the Vikings to withdraw. This demonstrated another important feature of Viking warfare. The army did not fight every battle. Its leaders understood when negotiation was more profitable than combat. Payments, supplies, and temporary agreements could be as valuable as battlefield victories. The army returned to East Anglia in 869 or 870. This time, the kingdom was conquered. King Edmund was captured and killed. Later Christian tradition transformed Edmund into a martyr. Stories claim that he refused to abandon Christianity and was tied to a tree, shot with arrows, and beheaded. His death became the center of a religious cult, and he was remembered as Saint Edmund. The Vikings now controlled Northumbria and East Anglia, while Mercia was under growing pressure. Only Wessex remained capable of sustained resistance. In 871, the Viking army entered Wessex and fought a series of battles against King Athelred and his younger brother Alfred. Some engagements ended in English victories, while others favored the Vikings. The fighting was exhausting for both sides. The Vikings could replace some losses through reinforcements, while Wessex struggled to defend several locations. Eventually, an agreement was reached and the army moved away. Alfred later became king and earned the name Alfred the Great. His conflict with Viking armies would define his reign. He reorganized defenses, built fortified settlements, and created a system that allowed Wessex to respond more effectively to invasion. The Great Heathen Army eventually divided. Different leaders pursued different goals. Halfdan returned to Northumbria and distributed land among his followers. This marked a transition from conquest to settlement. Other forces continued campaigning under new commanders. The conflict did not end with one army or one generation. Viking-controlled territories expanded across much of northern and eastern England. These regions became associated with the Danelaw, an area where Scandinavian political control and legal customs had strong influence. Scandinavian settlers established farms, rebuilt towns, and integrated with local communities. The legacy of the army can still be seen in place names. Settlements ending in forms such as by and thorp often reflect Scandinavian influence. English vocabulary also absorbed many Norse words. The invasion therefore changed more than political control. It transformed language, settlement, trade, and identity. Was the Great Heathen Army truly a force of revenge? Historical evidence cannot confirm that Ragnar's death caused the invasion. The campaign was too large and politically complex to be explained by one family grievance. Yet the revenge story captured something important about how history was remembered. It turned years of warfare into a single dramatic narrative. A father was killed. His sons crossed the sea. A kingdom fell. The real army conquered because England was divided, and because Viking commanders had developed new strategies of warfare and settlement. The legendary army conquered because the sons of Ragnar had promised revenge. History explains how the invasion happened. Legend explains why people remembered it. Ragnar Lothbrok occupies a strange place between history and imagination. He is one of the most famous Vikings ever remembered. Yet historians cannot confidently prove that the Ragnar described in the sagas existed as a single person. This uncertainty has not weakened his legacy. It has strengthened it. A fully documented historical ruler is limited by the surviving facts of his life. A legendary ruler can absorb the victories, tragedies, and personalities of many generations. Ragnar became such a figure. His story may contain memories of several historical warriors. The Viking commander Reginhurus, who attacked Paris in 845, may have contributed the famous French campaign. A leader killed in Britain may have inspired the conflict with Ella. The fathers or ancestors of Ivar, Bjorn, Halfdan, and Ubba may have contributed to the family tradition. Over time, these separate memories could have merged. Oral storytelling does not preserve events like a written archive. Each storyteller shapes the material for a new audience. Characters are combined, motives become clearer, and events become more dramatic. A raid carried out for silver becomes a heroic challenge against a king. A political marriage becomes the winning of a shield maiden. A dangerous animal becomes a dragon. A military defeat becomes a final confrontation with fate. Ragnar's name also gave unity to the Viking world. His supposed sons operated across different regions. Bjorn became connected with Sweden and Mediterranean expeditions. Ivar became associated with Ireland and England. Sigurd was linked with Denmark. By describing them as brothers, medieval tradition created one royal family whose influence stretched across Europe. This family connection was politically useful. Scandinavian rulers and aristocratic families could claim descent from Ragnar or his sons. A legendary ancestor made a dynasty appear ancient, heroic, and chosen for greatness. Many medieval royal genealogies included figures who were partly mythical. Their purpose was not simply to record biological relationships. They explained why a ruling family deserved authority. Archaeology provides important evidence for the Viking Age, but it has not produced a grave or object that can be securely identified as Ragnar's. Archaeologists have discovered ships, weapons, jewelry, settlements, fortifications, and burial sites. These findings reveal the world in which a Ragnar-like figure could have lived. The Oseberg and Gokstad ship burials demonstrate the extraordinary skill of Scandinavian shipbuilders and the wealth of Viking elites. Fortified settlements and ring fortresses reveal organized political authority. Trading centers show that the Vikings were connected with distant regions. Mass graves and battlefield evidence confirm the violence of Viking campaigns. Scandinavian-style objects found in Britain and Ireland demonstrate settlement as well as raiding. Coins from the Islamic world, discovered in Scandinavia, reveal the enormous distance covered by Viking trade networks. What archaeology does not provide is a simple confirmation of the sagas. The sagas were written for literary purposes, and individual objects rarely carry enough information to identify legendary characters. Even when a grave contains weapons and signs of high status, assigning a famous name to the person buried there is risky. Many Viking leaders remain unknown because written sources preserved only a small number of names. Ragnar's influence became especially strong in modern popular culture. 19th-century writers and artists became fascinated by the Vikings as symbols of adventure, nationalism, and a heroic northern past. They often romanticized Viking society and created images that were more dramatic than historically accurate. The famous horned Viking helmet belongs largely to this modern tradition. Viking warriors did not normally wear horned helmets in battle. The image became popular through art, costume design, and theatrical productions. Modern novels, films, games, and television programs have transformed Ragnar again. He is often portrayed as a farmer who rises through talent and ambition, questions the gods, and becomes a king through personal strength. These stories are not historical documentaries. They combine saga material with invented characters, altered timelines, and modern themes. Real historical figures who lived in different decades may appear together. Family relationships are changed to create stronger drama. However, popular culture has also encouraged millions of people to learn about Viking history. Viewers who first encounter Ragnar through television often begin reading about the sagas, archaeology, and the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. The danger comes when entertainment is mistaken for evidence. A dramatic scene may feel authentic because the costumes and landscapes appear realistic, but visual realism does not guarantee historical accuracy. The real Viking Age was more complicated than its popular image. Vikings were not one united people. They did not spend all their time raiding. They were farmers, merchants, craftspeople, settlers, explorers, and enslavers. Their society included poetry, law, religion, and international trade, as well as extreme violence. They attacked Christian communities but later converted to Christianity. They destroyed towns, but also founded and expanded trading centers. They captured people as slaves, but also integrated with local populations. Ragnar's legend contains many of these contradictions. He is portrayed as a family man and a ruthless conqueror, a clever strategist and a prideful fool, a historical king and a monster-slaying hero. What then should we conclude about him? It would be inaccurate to say with confidence that Ragnar Lothbrok never existed. A historical warrior named Ragnar may have inspired the tradition. It would also be inaccurate to treat every saga episode as factual. The safest conclusion is that the Ragnar known today is a legendary construction built around fragments of 9th century history. He may contain the memory of one real man, but his complete biography belongs to literature. His sons, or at least the commanders later identified as his sons, are easier to place in history. Their campaigns contributed to the collapse of Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, the growth of Scandinavian settlement, and the political transformation of Britain. The Great Heathen Army changed the balance of power in England. Its victories helped create the conditions that allowed Wessex, under Alfred and his successors, to lead resistance and eventually work toward English unification. In this way, Ragnar's legendary family became connected not only with Viking conquest, but with the creation of England itself. His cultural legacy is equally powerful. Ragnar represents the human desire to be remembered. In the sagas, he fears that the achievements of his sons will overshadow his own. He chooses a dangerous campaign because reputation matters more to him than safety. That choice destroys him, but it also ensures his immortality. More than 1,000 years later, Ragnar's name remains more famous than the names of many rulers whose existence is far better documented. He survives because his story contains everything a legend needs: ambition, love, war, betrayal, family, revenge, and a dramatic death. Was Ragnar Lothbrok real? Perhaps there was once a Viking commander whose name sounded like Ragnar. Perhaps he sailed west, fought kings, and fathered powerful sons. But the man who killed a serpent, married a shield maiden, conquered Paris, and laughed in a pit of snakes belongs to the world of legend. That does not make his story meaningless. Legends reveal what societies admire, fear, and wish to remember. Ragnar shows us how medieval Scandinavians imagined the perfect warrior king, and how they understood the terrible cost of glory. The historical Ragnar may remain hidden forever. The legendary Ragnar will never die.